Next, we have a panel of international experts with varied backgrounds, experiences, and diverse perspectives. We might not always have consensus across the board, but we're here in the spirit of the Olympic movement to exchange ideas and learn from one another. I believe that our collective voices will really strengthen safeguarding, not only in our own respective countries, but across the world for all of our athletes. We have a star-studded panel today. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves and give you about 3 minutes on their organizations, who they represent, and really talk about their connection to safeguarding and a hopeful observation that they have for the future of safeguarding. So we have Greta Barbone, Stefano Bastianon, yeah, I said it right the first time, Bastianon, Richard Bird, Joanna Maranhão, did I say it right? Perfect. Okay. Oh, Richard, it says Bird on here. Yes. I am so sorry, Richard.
That's fine.
I'm just reading the paper. And Claudia Villa. So I'll start with you.
So good morning to all, and thank you very much for being here. I'm Greta Barbone. I'm the Human Rights Manager of Fondazione Milano Cortina, so the organizing committee of these Olympic and Paralympic Games. It's really a pleasure to be here. My connection to safeguarding comes from a strong background on human rights. I've worked for international institutions like the International Criminal Court, but also NGOs for almost 20 years, and working a lot with victims of especially sexual and gender-based violence. So my connection to safeguarding comes to that, and I've joined the sport movement towards the work with Fondazione Milano Cortina. As for the awful observation about safeguarding, I think that on one way, when we hear athletes and athletes that are at the center of attention also coming forward and starting to share what happened to them, I think that is a very powerful and important moment. Of course, this causes to them some level of suffering in itself, because of course being under the attention on everybody, talking about some personal experience and some suffering, of course it's a secondary suffering, but at the same time it's very powerful for those other athletes that can find inspiration on that can find that their situation is actually similar and can find the courage to come forward as well. And this is because one of the main challenges of safeguarding is also in the underreporting of the violation of substance. So, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And my name is Stefano Bastianon. I am professor of EU sports law at the University of Bergamo, close to Milano, and I also work as an attorney at law and a CAS arbitrator. But beyond the titles and roles, I would say that I am someone who deeply believes in sport and in what sport should be. My personal journey into safeguarding did not begin with safeguarding itself. It began with human rights. For many years, my academic and my professional work focused on the protection of athletes' fundamental rights. Then, some years ago, something happened that changed my perspective. One day, I received a telephone call from Brussels, from a dear friend and colleague, Professor Michele Colucci. At that time, he was focusing on a global call to action on safeguarding in sport. And during that conversation, something became very clear to us, that the human rights and safeguarding go together. They cannot be separated. They talk about the same thing: respect, dignity, integrity in sport. My personal view is that safeguarding is about making human rights effective in sport. It's not symbolic, it's real, it's concrete, and because of that, safeguarding is not a choice. It's not a matter of policy preference, it's a legal duty and a moral responsibility at every level of sport. I strongly believe that when we protect athletes, we are not only protecting individuals, we are protecting the very essence of sport. We are protecting trust, dignity, and let me say, the beauty of the game. A sport that is not safe is not just unfair. It loses its meaning. And together with Michele Colucci and with the contribution of so many authors, and I'm very happy to see many of them here today, we try to give shape to this reflection in our book we called Protecting the Beauty of the Game Towards a Safeguarding Culture. We wanted this book to be a practical tool for those working in safeguarding, but let me say, even more importantly, we wanted it to send a clear message to everyone involved in safeguarding and especially to victims. You are seen, you are heard, and above all, you are not alone. The book is available open access, free of charge, because we think that access to knowledge in this field should not be a barrier. I also have a few paper copies here with me for those of you who might be interested. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for listening and for what you do to make sport a safer and better place for everyone. Thank you very much.
Firstly, thank you, Benita, and to the Centre for having me along today. As you've heard, my name is Richard Bush, sorry. already teasing. So I started working in safeguarding about 10 or 15 years ago when I was a junior in-house solicitor at the Football Association, that being the round one that they play over here. At that time, and as it still does, the FA had certainly a relatively sophisticated approach to safeguarding and responding to cases of abuse and policies and prevention and so on and so forth. And it gave me quite a skewed view. I naively thought that sport actually had quite a developed approach to safeguarding, but I learnt quickly after leaving the FA that that wasn't the case. So since leaving the FA, I've been fortunate to be able to help our governing body clients. I won't name check them all, some of them are here, but our client base is largely international federations and national federations and major event organisers. So I've been fortunate to take what I learned at the FA and be able to apply that and constantly develop and learn to help improve the processes and practices of our clients. In doing that, we work very closely with other experts. So, for example, those who are trained in investigations and dealing with people who have been abused or potentially been abused, expert risk assessors. So the point is we kind of try and stay in lane. So we work on the regulations, help develop policies, and help prevent and what I meant to say was present cases. There's a number of challenges that governing bodies face in particular. There's three main ones. Firstly, the response that sport has historically, the response of sport to cases in the past has previously been, so wrong. The reaction has been cover up rather than actually addressing and responding to the abuse. So that's quite understandably created a lot of trust issues within sport. Secondly, there's no uniform, let's compare this to, as a matter of sports regulation anyway, compare this to anti-doping. There is no uniform approach globally. Each organisation to more or less is left to work out its own processes and procedures. And then thirdly, resource. Obviously each organisation's got, every organisation in some respect has finite resource, but it's certainly fair to say that to now, certainly, there hasn't been enough resource dedicated to this area. And it's an area that all participants in sport, from governing bodies to participants to the wider public, has an interest in resolving effectively. So positive messaging, the existence of the centre of itself, events like today are showing that awareness, this is probably the case over the last 5-10 years, but the awareness of the importance of safeguarding and safe sport has increased and is continuing to increase. And with that, hopefully we'll have the increased resource that the area needs, and also perhaps, to the extent possible, move towards increased uniformity in the area as well. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Joanna Maranhão. This is the first time that saying a British name was harder than saying actually my name. So that was the first. Awesome. So I am a Brazilian former professional swimmer. I went to 4 Olympic Games for my country, and I think my connection to the topic comes from lived experience. I disclosed what has happened to me in 2008, but I was a victim in 1996 when I was 9. And because of the statutes of limitations, there was nothing that I could do. So I was brought, or the advocate in me was waking up by this. So I led a campaign to lift the statutes of limitations in Brazil. And that's when I kind of realized that this is a systemic issue, but I wanted to be someone beyond my own story. So moved to Europe to do a master's, conducted the prevalence study measuring the extent to which Brazilian athletes have been exposed to psychological, physical, sexual violence. And so I wear both of the research and advocate hat. And today I work at the Sport and Rights Alliance. I love that Stefano mentioned this connection between human rights and safeguarding. I couldn't agree more. The Sport and Rights Alliance is a global coalition of civil society organizations fighting for human rights in and through sport. But if we want to represent people with lived experience, we can't do it. We need to have multiple voices. So that's where we came in with the Athletes Network for Safer Sport. We are an international group of people impacted by violence in the context of sport. So not just through lived experience, but also, unless you are a robot, if you're working in the space, lived experience or not, you're going to be impacted to it. So the network is an open space to everyone, because we need to think sustainably on how we're going to disagree in a respectful way. Otherwise, we're not going to move this field forward. And the network has been operating for over 2 years, so has been created by survivors for survivors. We have more than 300 members, and everything that we do is based on the voices of people with lived experience. It doesn't come out of my head. It really comes from the voices of impacted people. So I'm just honored to be here and discuss some of the things, including this idea on having a binding document, an international approach, just like we have in other integrity issues. Thank you. I hope I wasn't over 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me here. And it's always an honor to share a panel with Joanna and all the other members. So I'm Claudia Villa, and I am an international safeguarding specialist. I worked in safeguarding throughout all my career. I started working with refugees and asylum seekers. I had the pleasure to work across sectors and bring in the experience of doing safeguarding in other sectors to sports. I then moved into supporting survivors of sexual abuse and exploitation and human trafficking in the social care sector, education sector, and then moved into sport. So everything that I say and everything that I do, all the systems that I put in place are from my experience in supporting survivors, victims of abuse, cross-sector. Unfortunately, that doesn't only happen in sport, it happens in all sector, in all parts of our society, unfortunately. And I feel that the experience of seeing something that works, and also some of the scandals that have happened, for example, in the humanitarian sectors, really big scandals, taking the learnings from those sectors into sport has really helped me shaping the safeguarding in sport. I currently work for the Center for Sport and Human Rights, which obviously link human rights and safeguarding. The Center for Sport and Human Rights work for organizations by translating sport language into human rights language. We support all the organizations in the sport ecosystem to embed human rights in the governance systems and help them accessing support when this is needed. I also am glad that there is a movement that is now emerging, as that wasn't like that a few years ago, that link human rights and safeguarding as the two were completely separate. In my experience, safeguarding, when institutionalized, operationalized human rights. So by implementing and institutionalizing safeguarding, you have human rights in operation. So it's a pleasure for me to be here, and I can't wait to share to be more about my own experience on safeguarding on the ground.
Thank you, everyone. We've been in an organization for about 9 years, and we still, as our panelists in the previous panel said before, we still have a lot to learn. We're still learning and growing, and this is an opportunity for you all to share some best practices, first and foremost, that you have observed and what's really working, right? Not just in concept, but on the ground, in the work that you do every day, what's really making a difference and having an impact. So whoever wants to start. I'll just pick someone. Stefano, go ahead.
Well, from my point of view, I would say that what really works is leadership that leads by example, and safeguarding that puts people, especially victims, at the center. From my point of view, safeguarding policies. Yes. Safeguarding policies are very important, but they are not enough. Everything must be grounded in local realities, not just written policies. If we want to make safeguarding credible and effective, we must involve people, we must work with people, and we must build a safeguarding culture with the people and for the people.
Go ahead, Greta.
So, from my perspective, I think I wanted to share two thoughts on this. The first one is that safeguarding has many different dimensions. And I think it's important that we try as much as we can to have an holistic approach to it. As you were saying, victims must be at the center, but the victimization has different connotations sometimes. And there are different experts that could help the athlete to recover, to heal. So there is a legal dimension, which is very strong, of course, because there has been a violation. And of course, there is a need for the lawyers and the legal professionals in general to be supportive and to be aware. But there is also sometimes a strong gender dimension, for example, in the violation, because it is unfortunately true that women or, for example, members of the LGBTQI communities or people with disabilities suffer from this violation with higher rates. So it is something that has to be recognized. There are, of course, medical staff that need to support the athlete, either psychologically or sometimes there are some physical wounds that need also to recover. And I'm mentioning only some, I would say, of these different dimensions that have a strong importance. So to me, what works, what I've seen working, it's having an holistic approach. We organized in Italy with CONI and with the IOC and trained the trainers on safeguarding, and we made sure to have all different components. And I think there was a richness in the discussion that really looked at the system from different eyes that was particularly helpful. And probably the second thought I wanted to share that links very much to what you just said is also that it's true, we need to lead by example, and the point is that safeguarding arrives in a second moment when there is an actual violation of a right. Before thinking about the violation, it's important to think about the promotion of those rights. So to me, the promotion of gender equality, inclusion, diversity is really at the same time at the center of safeguarding as much as putting in place a system of protection when there are violations of these rights. And again, with the organizing committee, with the Fondazione Milano Cortina, we really put at the center of our thinking and vision the promotion also of gender equality with many different at many different levels in the games, but also in our own structure. We are very proud to be the most gender balanced, to host the most gender balanced edition of the Winter Games, but also to have inside Fondazione reached the 50% gender balance, which is just an example to tell you we need to live it, not just to plan for the games to be that way. We really need to, live it.
Claudia, did you have something?
Thank you. So for me, what I've seen is that there is a move towards multi-agency working, which is really the essence of safeguarding. Safeguarding cannot happen in isolation. It cannot be a department on its own that operates on its own. It needs to work across different organizations internally and externally. So if we are at a major sporting event like we are now, safeguarding is part of all the functional areas. So safeguarding is part of transport, safeguarding is part of accreditation, safeguarding is part of hospitality. So you have to have those safeguarding thread across all the areas and collaborate with your internal colleagues, but also external colleagues. Like, how do you safeguard athletes and everybody that is coming to the games if you don't work in collaboration with the border force, for example, with hospitals, with medical staff here? So it's a global effort, and I see the push and the move towards, yes, we need to work together. We are all together. I see a memorandum of understanding being written to collaborate. And I see a move also towards information sharing, which is harder, but is getting there. So many times when I was faced with dealing with a case, people were saying, I'm sorry, I cannot give you this information because of confidentiality, because of data protection, and that's created barriers. But we are becoming really, I wouldn't say clever, but we are understanding what safeguarding means, that we need to share those information to protect those that may be harmed or those who are harmed. So that is a big shift that I'm seeing. It's not quite there yet, but it's positive. And the other thing that I wanted to say is leadership. What I've seen happen and needs to happen in safeguarding is clear leadership from the top. And I've seen leaders coming forward and really committing to safeguarding. Not all of them, but many of them are doing that. They are really saying, we stand for safeguarding. We put money where safeguarding is, which has been a problem as well. Resources has often been one of the reasons why, which is not an excuse, but it has been a reason why safeguarding wasn't developed as much as possible. But having good, clear leadership and clear governance at the top that shows what good governance, good safeguarding governance look like, what a safe and acceptable and good safeguarding behavior looks like, leading by example, then all of these trickle down to the bottom till to grassroots organization, but it needs to come from the top.
Yeah, so adding up to what my colleagues have shared, I think the growing momentum is a result of athletes breaking the dome of silence, right? Like, we wouldn't be where we are if these people haven't spoken up courageously. So I also wanted to take the chance to honor people in the room who are people with lived experience, but somehow have chosen to or didn't have the opportunity to disclose. And so linked to that, I think that survivor engagement is an empirical and fundamental part of it. That's where other integrity issues have missed out. Like Richard have shared, we have international binding documents for other integrity issues, but we were in a rush to protect sport, this abstract institution of sport, and we forgot to include the people that we want to protect of sport. And when it comes to safe sport, if we do that, we miss it. That's not going to be legitimate. That's sort of like why some people don't perceive the WADA code as legitimate. They were not part of the construction of that code. So when it comes to survivor engagement, when done in a non-tokenistic way, in a dignified, in a respectful manner, survivors can play a role in anything. So creation of policy, policy reform, creation of reporting systems, research, advocacy, awareness raising. And that actually humanizes. Like, we build this trust because, as Richard mentioned, there still is a lack of trust. So we need institutional courage, like I've never seen an institution like the U.S. Center for Safe Sport to sit here in front of an international audience and say, I want to learn from you. This is what we're doing. What do you think of that? And then publicly say, this is a gap. Like, we don't see that very often. And that's extremely important for athletes to see, oh, so those are human people trying to do a good work. That makes us really understand the gaps and then engage in a better way. So yeah, linked to that, I would say that creation of safe sport entities are also something that is trending, only in the global north at the moment, but it's something that is very important to be done because it is a very complex and dense topic, but it needs to be done tied with institutional courage to go out and say, I got it wrong. I want to reform it. Come with me and help me to make it better. Yeah.
And building nicely on, I think, on what Joanna's just said, and with my kind of regulatory hat on, a best practice point being clarity between all stakeholders as to what safeguarding procedures and proceedings are actually designed to achieve and what they can realistically achieve, including alongside other processes and procedures like criminal process, civil procedures, child protection mechanisms, and so on and so forth. And I think, I obviously don't seek to speak for victims, but my understanding is, understandably, that what a victim might seek will vary from case to case and that victim's circumstances. So, and again, my understanding would be that the most prevalent desire is that there's no repetition of the abuse, but understandably, in some cases, or in fact, perhaps in most cases, the victim might also seek some kind of punishment or sanction for a perpetrator. So when we think about how we're building processes and procedures, and as Joanna said, this is more, I suppose, in the global north, so please confine what I'm saying to that geographic area, but there is a distinct approach between what might be referred to as a disciplinary approach to this, which is a breach of a rule, so for sake of argument, you will not abuse XYZ, and a safeguarding approach, which is a slightly different way of approaching this, which is to say, is person X a risk of harm to others? And if so, how do we manage that risk? And as I said, without going into huge amounts of details, you can perhaps see that the latter is a more objective approach. It allows things, in theory at least, to be less adversarial. The outcomes are different. There's a difference between sanctions and risk management measures, but I'm mindful of time, so I won't go into them completely. And there is a way in which you can blend both of those two things. So the outcome of a process can be, one, a risk management measure, which might take the form of someone participating under supervisory conditions, coupled with a sanction to reflect the damage that they've caused. As I say, that of itself could take a day's conference speaking about, so I'll leave it there. So I think the best practice point really is kind of clarity as to what we're seeking to achieve, clarity as to what it can achieve, clarity as to how it is delivered. And then when it comes to actually kind of the rules you have in place, it might be necessary, again with the lawyer's hat on, it might be necessary to have fairly detailed rules, but that's to allow for the huge variety of cases that safeguarding and safe sport covers. It goes from very serious sexual abuse all the way down to, if that's not a pejorative term, but low level or poor practice concerns. So you need to be able to deal with everything. But actually when we come to public messaging, what appears on websites and so on and so forth, that should all be as clear, concise and digestible as possible. So I think those are my best practice points.
Thank you. A couple of you talked about folks having institutional courage, and to say when you don't know something, when you're kind of maybe in over your head, when you still have questions, when you've gotten something wrong. And I think that's really important. And part of that, of course, is this idea of collaboration, because it's in those spaces and through that dialogue that we're able to have that courage to share those situations and those issues. So I just wonder how you all feel we can better collaborate internationally. This is one instance, one morning out of 16, 17 days of glory here in Milan. But how can we carry this forward and continue this collaboration and sharing lessons learned and best practices? So I'll start with you, Greta.
So on my side, I thought a lot about, indeed, how to enhance collaboration. And I think indeed, the organization of this event is great, but we need also spaces throughout the years between, big sport events to actually work together a little bit more closely, because it's true, it's only through that collaboration. And what I have observed many times in the human rights world in general is really that lack not of willingness, but resources to make sure that collaboration exists. And the way to make sure that collaboration is there is through building networks, building coalitions that are that go beyond the national level and are actually international coalition and international networks. But of course, there is also a need for cross-national funding for that, which is not always easy to find or to convince states of the importance of it. So, of course, today the world in a way is smaller in the sense that all the technology has helped us moving forward, so we can take advantage of it, and we do it with the Symposium online as well. But I think there must be a willingness and the coordination of the work that needs some form of structure. It can be a loose structure, but it's difficult to advance all together if there is no one coordinating that work. So, that is my hope, that there will be indeed such an institution taking the lead on that.
I come from a sport for development world, and in that case, there's usually an organization in that community that serves as a backbone organization to coordinate those activities in that particular community. And I do believe that there's that need for that to make sure that because otherwise we're just going to stay in our own little space, right? Stefano?
I was saying that at international level, which is my favorite perspective, I would say that the collaboration and cooperation already exist. This book is a very small example of cooperation with so many authors from different parts of the world. And this book wants to be an open platform for everyone who wants to contribute to promote safeguarding. Of course, we can do much more. We must learn how to work as a community. We must learn how to share experiences, best practices, and even gaps and lacunae. But above all, let me say that it must be clear that no single person or institution can claim a monopoly on safeguarding. That's a fundamental point, because if we think that I am better than the other, safeguarding is my field of competence, we go nowhere. Safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, and everyone is invited to contribute.
Thank you.
I agree kind of with the broad international leadership point, so I won't repeat it, but so focusing more narrowly on something, and Claudia touched on this earlier, which is the importance of information and the importance of information sharing, and that is particularly difficult across international borders. Not that I think nation states would be embarrassed by me saying this, but it's far more difficult when we work for international federations to get relevant information out of some jurisdictions than it is others. And I think looking at it from a sport perspective, so for example, in doping, we have a UN convention. Now that might be easier in doping because it's a specific sport issue, whereas obviously here, information sharing to prevent abuse isn't a purely sports issue. So what we need is some form of, I'm not, for better or worse, I'm not a data protection lawyer myself, but whether it's some form of convention, but at least some way of opening up these information sharing channels, because otherwise both domestically and internationally. There's no, and I think this was mentioned this morning, but there's nothing necessarily stopping a football coach moving from one territory or the other, or even just changing their sport and it not being picked up. So that would be where I would suggest focus needs to be placed, or one specific part of it anyway.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that because that's precisely why we started engaging with UNESCO in 2023. We have the WADA code, but we have the anti-doping convention. We kind of like legitimate WADA to do what they do. So we started work with the sports sector in UNESCO, thinking of hopefully one day a convention, but I think that the geopolitical status of the world that doesn't allow us to think of that at the moment. So what we've been working closely with UNESCO is on global standards for safe sport. So those are aimed at governments, what government needs to do to protect the people of sport. And just beyond that, our organization has been working over the next year to ensure that the voices of impacted people, of survivors, are feeding into this document. So we've done this, so I invite all of you. I don't have a lot of time to go over details, but the document is heavily, there's a lot of survivor input in it, and it's going to continue until the enforcement that's going to be in 2027 at the next MINUPS convention, and then hopefully in the future to move towards a more binding document. And the other thing is really cross-sector learning, like clerical abuse, military abuse, very similar to sport. I always talk to advocates and experts working in those spaces, so sometimes we don't even need to invent the wheel. There's so much work that has been done there as well.
Thank you. And what I would add is the importance of transparent reporting. So again, bringing the learning from working in social care sector, all the data about abuse are anonymously published in a county council where I worked, and they are available for everybody to see. And what I really believe is that progress happens when stakeholders are willing to share what did not work as well as what did work. And data can really inform prevention plans. So if you see in a council, in a county where sexual abuse happen, where criminal exploitation happen, you know that doesn't only happen there, it will happen in the next county. So if we apply the same approach to sport, if we publish those anonymized, transparent data, and we say there is a lot of prevalence of emotional abuse in this sport or in this region or in this country, then how do we work having those data to prevent this happening? So if you have data and you have data that are published, that are transparent, then you can work to prevent those happening. What I've seen in sports is that there is a lot of secrecy and a lot of negativity about having those published, and it seems like we're not doing a good job if this happen. The thing is that this happen anyway, it's just that you either don't know that it's happening or you don't want to say that it's happening, but that will continue to happen. So having those transparent data for everybody to see, then we can collaborate together and say, hey, you have this problem in this sport, I have a similar sport, or I am next to you, this may be happening here, the kids may be moving in, the athletes may be moving in, the coaches may be moving in, so how can we stop that? And this can happen when we use data to our advantage.
That's great. We find ourselves, and I'm in a process, I talked about this a little bit yesterday, we had a reception, and of doing some stakeholder engagement, listening tour, if you will, and if we have a third party doing that work, both internally with our team, as well as externally with, survivors and athletes and coaches and federations and our Olympic committee, et cetera. And it's really important to really hear from them on the ground what is happening, and particularly from a victim advocate standpoint, and really putting that at the center of the work. So I appreciate a lot of your comments in that regard. But we also, you asked a couple of poignant questions earlier of our team about capacity, not only at our level, but at the federation, national governing body level as well. So that's one of the huge barriers for us, is just the lack of resources or limited resources at our level, but also within the federations. What other barriers do you see as the biggest, hurdles? I'm a hurdler, to us achieving success in protecting athletes, both practically, kind of more operationally on a day-to-day basis, but also, we aim to put, athlete safety and well-being at the center of American sport culture. And I think ultimately that's the goal of everyone here in this room. So both practically, what are the barriers, and then more around our culture? How do we get the culture to change and shift? What barriers do you see to that? So I'm going to start with you, Claudia.
So I think resources, yes, is definitely a barrier, but cannot be an excuse. So I have worked in an environment where I had very, very limited resources, but you need to be creative, because if you don't do something, then abuse can happen. So that's definitely, it would be great to have more resources towards safeguarding. I think also fragmented responsibility is something that I come across, especially across the jurisdiction. If you are dealing with a case that has cross-jurisdictional boundaries, then at times it's really hard to ensure that organizations accept their accountability for what has happened. So you have this fragmented responsibility and fragmented accountability that nobody wants to take. And then the victim is a victim again. So that's something that needs to be clear at the beginning of the process. For example, of a game, what are we going to do? Who is going to deal with what? And I know that it needs to be decided on a case-by-case basis as well, because there are complexity. But there needs to be the accountability and responsibility that organization can take on. There is to acknowledging that systemic, institutional, and organizational responsibility. So really, like we cannot shy away from that. This is happening here. So what are we going to do about it? We really need to acknowledge and act. And also, there is fear of reputational damage. As I said before, there is no transparency on data, because we don't want to know that this is happening here. So what are we going to do? But in reality, being transparent helps you stopping those people entering the system. So there is a theory that I very much like, is from David Finkeler, a researcher that looks at the predisposition of somebody to enter an organization for abuse. And then the precondition needs to be that you have an intention to abuse, then your inhibition to abuse are removed, and then the obstacle that stop you from entering an organization to abuse are not there. So we need to make sure that our organization is watertight, and we can stop those people entering our organization by doing the risk assessment and all of that. And sometimes by not saying, by not acknowledging that there is a problem, those people keep entering the organization. So and I have a lot more to say, but I'll let people talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a short answer practically is the absence of an international binding document. Just we have with other integrity issues. I've mentioned this, Richard, as well. Like, it shouldn't be optional if whether an organization is going to deal with safe sport, yes or no, or choose like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it, but it's just going to be on prevention. And then the previous panel spoke very eloquently on how one thing feeds into the other, so they shouldn't operate in silos. So definitely a binding document enforced by the International Olympic Committee, which is the one who regulates the Olympic movement. And then parallel to that, this document that UNESCO is building, so one can feed into another and kind of like legitimate what's going to be written within this IOC document. That's going to be very important. That's not going to fix all the issues, like the water code and the anti-doping convention didn't stop doping from happening, but it did mitigate. We do have a system. There are many problems within the system, but at least we have a system. And when it comes to safe sport, we need that urgently. It shouldn't be optional for a sports governing body. And culturally, also, it was mentioned by Monica that is the ethos on sport. Whether, like, even at the grassroots sport, there's this competitive component, the win at all costs mentality, and so on. But when I talk about that, some people say, "Oh, so are you against authority? Are you against athletes training hard?" Like, absolutely not. Now, I went to 4 Olympic Games. I absolutely know what is it like to train hard. But it's about the good use of the authority, right? Like, for instance, when you commit, when you say, "I want to be an Olympian," so we have 4 years from now, and you have someone who has an authority over you, a coach, that's going to actually remind you on the days where you're really not feeling like training. That's really different from imposing, dehumanizing you, and exploiting you to win medals. So that cultural shift, it's really important, but it takes longer. It's way more complicated, and Monica spoke about it way better than I ever could.
So again, with my lawyer's hat on, as I suppose I must, one particular challenge I think is making sure that processes and procedures are fair for all those involved with them, because at the risk of gross oversimplification, there is a tension between the desire and the right approach of believing victims, and then on the other hand, for lack of a better term, innocent till proven guilty. And obviously the tension between those two things is obvious. And then again, looking at it clinically, my understanding is that the kind of level of quote-unquote false reporting in a criminal context is low single digits. So very, very rare, but not so rare that we can disregard the possibility entirely. And if we don't find the right balance for our process and procedures, trust will erode in the system either way. So, for example, that might manifest itself by too many successful appeals. And, in this context, the more instances of hearings we have, the less desirable that is, because it obviously risks re-traumatizing and so on and so forth. So that's one particular challenge. I don't necessarily have the right answer, but that's one particular challenge that everyone's going to need to get right, and as I say, ideally, ultimately in a uniform manner. And then second challenge, the more cultural one, was I remember being in a room, we were advising a domestic governing body client on introducing its first safeguarding policy and first safeguarding regulations, and we sat down with the stakeholders in the room, and one of the stakeholders said, there is nothing, the basically governing body action has got nothing to do with this, it's all police, it's all local authorities, there's no, basically what are you doing? But it was said with such force that, because as I was slightly less experienced, I sat there going, oh, hang on, is that person right or not? But it just emphasized, brought home to me the scale of the cultural challenge that some sports will face, and just the importance of being brave, being courageous, repeating the message, explaining the importance, giving examples as to why it's important. But, that isn't just a legal problem. That's across all disciplines in this area. So that's, for me, the cultural challenge.
Well, two of you talked about this idea of accepting accountability, responsibility for safeguarding, and it's almost like if I feel like if I just turn a blind eye, if I just pretend like it's not my job, that somehow it's going to go away, or at least I won't have to be responsible for taking care of it. So, yeah, I can see that being a huge barrier. Stefano?
I would say that the two main problems I see are limited resources and systems that are too complex.
As regards the first point, I fully agree with
Claudia. Limited resources are a problem, but cannot be an excuse. There is plenty of resources freely available online, so please go on the web, download it, study and disseminate. System too complex. I said that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, but this does not means that everyone has to do everything without a shared vision. In Europe, especially in Europe, the landscape is poorly harmonized, even because the European Union has not a direct competence to legislate on sport and on safeguard. For this reason, Michele and I are actually working to ensure that safeguarding is mentioned in the forthcoming European Commission communication on sport. We will try to organize an event at the European Parliament to promote this goal. And then, as already said before, I think that the next step is to find a way to establish an international binding covenant, if possible, or at least a resolution on safeguarding in sport, similar to those that exist in the field of corruption, anti-doping, and manipulation of sport level.
So on my side, well, most of the thing I agree with everything you said before. So of course it's harder being the last one. But I wanted to say maybe something more on the cultural change, because I believe there is a big challenge to try to address, in the sense that, of course, cultural changes take a long time to materialize, and there must be people putting forward again and again a different narrative. And I was thinking the two things that could help cultural change in general are basically two in my mind. One is definitely the data, the scientific data supporting the idea that a different model of coaching, positive coaching, and can actually achieve even more. There is a need for more studies of the link between the practice and how you practice and the results, which I think could help. Even though I think we must be also very open to accept that scientific data look at how things are. I truly believe that a person who is the best at their potential would achieve more, but if the scientific data said, well, they actually don't achieve more, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think the cultural change also need to recognize that winning is not the most important part, and that as a society, I think it takes an effort to recognize that, and we see it everywhere. We don't see it just in sport. I even see it as a parent with my child, sometimes educating people to freedom and to be aware of the importance of their rights needs to be balanced with other things, and we need to be very cognizant of the choice that we make. The other thing I was thinking is what could help a cultural change is also the publication that would make us realize and would help us and give us tools to fight some stereotypes that we inevitably have grown up with, and that sometimes even in the best of our efforts we replicate. When I came back to Italy, I realized that, for example, in the way sometimes I talk, since I studied, I did most of my studying and my work experience abroad, in the way sometimes I talk in Italy, I was repeating some bias that I was growing up with. And so there are tools that are very useful. I'll make an example. I found as a very important tool the IOC portrayal guidelines on fair representation. And they mention it because, of course, the representation in sport is absolutely key, in the sense that it can repeat biases and stereotype, or it can fight it. And I find this publication a useful tool to realize what we are doing with our words, with the language, with the images, on how we portray athletes in sport. And I think there is a need to go even beyond that, and maybe to look at the practices, at the language that are used, also in the training, in coaching for athletes. I think that could help for some people to realize that they are perpetrating harmful practices. Sometimes people don't realize it genuinely, and that could be a useful instrument. And then I think the cultural change also has to do with the underreport, in the sense that I believe underreporting is usually rooted in the fact that by saying that there was a violation, and that was already the first victimization of individuals, then the person undergoes another victimization that comes from how the institution respond to it, how the society responds to it. So I believe the cultural change and the underreporting are linked, and fighting both and trying to also ensure that the institution take responsibility, not in a fragmented way, as we were hearing also by the other speaker. They would indeed help reducing the secondary victimization, and then more reporting would come forward.
April and I talk often about coaching practices, things that were going on around us as we were athletes. She's a lot younger than I am, but we're spanning a few decades between us, and when you know better, as she was saying earlier, then you can do better. And we even as athletes, we're again not directly victims of any kind of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse ourselves, but seeing practices, incidents happening around us, having friends that married their coaches, right? Well, the relationship was happening and going on right in front of our very eyes, and we weren't necessarily aware or putting it all together, right? So I really like what you were saying about, we're not necessarily cognizant of those biases or those practices that may be harmful, and we perpetuate them because we're, of our ignorance in that regard. Thank you to all of our panelists. Gosh, you're really amazing and so knowledgeable in your respective areas, and you bring such a wide variety of experience to the table as athletes, as scholars, as practitioners, and it was really awesome for me to be up here on the dais with you. And thank you again, all of you, for attending and supporting the event. We appreciate it. We'll be around. We can have some one-on-one conversations for the next 20 or 30 minutes until they kick us out of here, but we're just excited. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you.